The Breaking Defense All-Domain Interview, made possible by our presenting sponsor, Parsons. I'm on line now with Preston Dunlap, the Chief Architect for the Air and Space Forces, dealing with ABMS, the Advanced Battle Management System, which is one of the two key components, along with the Navy's nascent effort, of the Joint All-Domain Command and Control System, which was basically created at the OSD level by General John Hyten and a bunch of other people. And given its importance, Mr. Dunlap, I wanted to start off by asking you, we're expecting the construct in December or thereabouts. What influence do you expect it will have on your work?
I'm excited by what General Hyten, through his leadership on the Joint Staff, as well as the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who have both been spearheading the efforts to provide all-domain command and control and the underlying network data architecture to be able to enable that to happen. And so over the course of the last year, the operators and the folks in the Pentagon have been working to build that document out to be able to express what an operational construct might look like. The exciting part has been that document and the operators working on it have been working hand in glove with each of the services that have been developing technology to be able to support it. And so what I have seen is a really great opportunity where the development folks are working side by side with the operational concept folks, and each are influencing each other. And so because of that, I don't anticipate any surprises when that's sort of made official. But what I'm confident in is that that's going to continue to mature as both the operational and tactics get worked out, as the technology gets worked out side by side. And really what we're talking about is development and operators together with each other. And that's Army, that's Navy, that's Marines, that's Air Force, that's Space Force, and even Coast Guard and the intelligence community as well, all working together. So I'm excited to see that, and I appreciate the leadership of the Deputy Secretary and the Vice Chairman in particular, driving this forward, both from a concept perspective and then General Hyten as well, and his looking new ways at requirements perspective.
Could you maybe give us an example of how you think, given some of the work you guys have done with ABMS and the various experiments, including the, what are they called, the global integration exercises, of what ABMS is going to look like, how it will function?
Yeah, so this year, sort of two things have been happening. So the Joint Staff has been leading a series of war games and exercises on that globally integrated campaign plan to drive the operational community together. At the same time, each of the services have been working either on their individual concepts that they were tasked for. For example, the Air Force was tasked to lead the all-domain C2 component of that, and each service had a subsequent concept to be able to work on. Meanwhile, the Joint Staff has been leading with the combatant commands and supporting services a series of exercises throughout the year to be able to cut across the seams. And all the operators, and I agree from a technology perspective, that not just in the future, but today, there are no lines on the battlefield. Winning doesn't look like deconflicting space, but in fact looks like integrating capabilities and working together as an ecosystem across all the services. General Hyten's got that exactly right. And so what he's doing is working at the combatant commander level to be able to drive forward the operational force so that the operators and the intended users of the capabilities are ready to think as a global force and not just sort of with lines somewhat arbitrarily drawn in terms of their regions. From a technology perspective, that means the rest of us building capabilities to enable that line of thinking means that we also have to be agnostic to lines in the sand or lines in space or combatant commander areas of responsibility on a command plan diagram, for example. And so where I see this sort of cutting each other and connecting to each other, if you will, this year is an opportunity towards the end of the fiscal year where we've got the opportunity with each of the services now pulling capabilities into their all-domain C2 ecosystem. And so what I'm hoping to drive towards is that we match that operational concept development led by the chairman with an event that's co-timed with what we in the Air and Space Force call on-ramps, but an opportunity to be able to work with each of the services and the joint staff together. And in May, we hope to work with all the combatant commands and the joint staff, as well as the services, to host the first globally integrated on-ramp or all-domain C2 activity, to be able to bring it all together, where I hope to see the concepts that the joint staff is working on with the combatant commanders through that activity meet the technology, and rubber meets the road in that type of event. I would imagine many of these happening over time. I think that's the first real opportunity we can sort of make both of them connect in the middle.
Can you give us, I mean, the general concept is you're going to take all data from all sensors you can access, pull it all together, a lot of it through ABMS, and fuse that and use it for targeting and for command and control and recommendations to commanders, right? Broadly speaking.
Yeah, so one way to think about it that may make sense to a lot of folks is if you remember back in 2001 when Steve Jobs talked about the iPod, and he described that the iPod was 1,000 songs in your pocket. What ABMS is enabling here, and the other contributory JADC2 isn't 1,000 songs in your pocket, but you could say 1,000 kill chains in your pocket. It's bringing the power of the data that's certainly stuck in locations where it comes from, and then enabling that to be accessed and turned into information and decisions and machine-to-machine effects. And that might actually literally be in your pocket on a handheld device, like we've started to demonstrate, or it might be 1,000 kill chains that show up in your cockpit or your ground station, or you fill in the blank what you're operating at. But that's the operational end state, and what that does. If you do that, and we know it can be done because we're talking over something that works that same way right now, so we know we can do it. It's making it useful for the military and the environments that we have to operate in, and then actually be able to then use that, employ that in a way that makes sense to the end user. So I'm confident we can get there. The difficulty will be then taking a wide variety of systems that are both new and then old, and then bringing them into that data network together.
Okay, let's take this down from the intergalactic level a little and go to what actionable progress has ABMS, which is a whole lot of things stuck together, but what has it made towards making JADC2 a reality? Can you give us not how many apps you've created or the new coding, but things that actually do stuff?
I'm sure many folks would argue that,
I know.
software is the paradigm of the future. So perhaps we can talk about that separately. But I love the question, actually, because I think even a year ago, or perhaps most of these conversations were certainly where ABMS and JADC2 were a year ago. All the conversations were about, hey, what's going to fall from the sky in a big bang event in 2035 or 2040. Maybe even 2050, depending on who you were talking to. And we all know that at digital speed, that is never going to deliver what the warfighter actually needs. So the fact that we're actually able to have a conversation within 12 months of a program start is that we're moving in the right direction. And so I'm glad you asked it. You should keep asking those kind of questions. And so there's two ways that we should think about answering that one. One is we should always have that eye towards the future. But we have to be, humble and wise enough to recognize that technology is going to mature in ways that we don't understand or can predict, especially in the digital age. And then the adversary is going to both operate and then adopt technology that we also can't, perfectly predict. Therefore, the most important attribute that the system needs to have, and I think General Hyten has this exactly right, is we've got to be agile enough to be responsive. We can't lock something on a stone tablet and hope that it works 7 to 10 years. So that's where it gets really practical for me, which is that what we're looking for of the technologies and capabilities, and then forcing them to go through these buzzsaw events that we call on-ramps to ensure that they don't just work with bubblegum and duct tape in single scenarios, but in fact work across a whole range of scenarios. So what's real now? There's going to be some tech geek speak. I'm sorry, Colin, but the
Our
most
readers are used to it.
the most important thing that actually needs to get built first is the tech stack. Why do I say that? Because for a decade or so, we've been sort of beating the table on where lightning bolts that aren't real, where's artificial intelligence, and why don't we have it in the systems the way we want it? The problem is that we keep focusing, on that end state, which is a good end state and a desirable one, but we never resource or put the attention to deliver everything that has to be in place to lead up to that. So the big wins, so far are the fact that if data is that oil of conflict or the lifeblood or the primary currency, depending on the analogy you prefer across the services, the most important thing is enabling that to move across the system and then make sense of it quickly. And so the big win so far is that we have a live infrastructure environment that includes cloud and platform. And this year we'll start to move that to the tactical edge, where you actually have a home for the data. So you actually need the data to have a place to go and to be able to interact with it and then move across a distributed network. And so the big win is actually having that at the unclass, secret, elements of the secret releasable level for friends and partners, and then up to the SCI level, and then even higher classification in the coming months. And what inside of that infrastructure, that tech stack, isn't just for software development, which we hear a lot about. And it's exciting. But what I'm really talking about is that warfighting digital tech stack to be able to interact and pull from the data, when you need it, where you need it, for that operational side of the equation. And so we've got data inside of that infrastructure. Sensors are pushing data into it. Decision nodes are pulling data from that. And then there's a whole bunch of software applications, because that's typically where the humans interact with these bits and bytes that are then pulling and making sense of that. And there's a whole other modernization effort that we have going on to be able to get away from applications that are currently simply work only for a particular platform or a particular computer. And the operational end state here that we've actually already seen glimpses of through the 3 on-ramps that occurred this past fiscal year is what I would call putting C2 back in the hands of the warfighter. And what I mean is that for far too long, acquisition, technology, the commercial base has forced operational leaders to pick who is going to do what mission and have what responsibility simply because they happen to be in the right plane, tent, in the right room, in front of the right computer that happens to have it. And what we actually have done already is shown that at least at the secret level back in September, we've now enabled many locations that weren't designated as a C2 or an information exploitation location to take on additional roles because they've tapped into that tech stack operational environment, the data that's available, and then the same common application environment to be used. And that's not going to stop. It's going to keep growing and expanding the sources that feed it, the operators that use it, and then the user experience that actually interacts and grows to trust or not trust the different algorithms that are inside of there. So there are many different fronts that I would say that both the Air Force and Space Force, as well as the other services, have not 10 or 20 years from now, but actually even right now started to develop, demonstrate, and even begin to field some certain capability.
One of the difficulties in covering all this is that there are so many different moving pieces. So, there's software, there's cloud, there are things made of metal, not many of them, but some. There are sensors. Can you give our readers some feeling for how, say, an F-35 feeds into all of this, without obviously breaching classification, but, they've got that amazing radar, they've got their Intel Fusion engine, and they've got MATL. So taking those things and reaching out to the rest of the force, what are some of the ways you found using the F-35 changes as you're building this?
Colin, first of all, you now not only have readers, but you also have viewers.
Absolutely true.
You get to talk to both now. So to your specific example of the F-35. So our chief and past chiefs and others have described that as a quarterback of a joint penetrating team. Now, it's both a data provider, or it could be, if ABMS enabled, as well as an information consumer. So if you take that with all the capabilities that it has, what you want is the ability to be able to get that information out of the cockpit and to others who may be able to fuse a picture that's broader than that individual platform. And then for that platform to be able to ingest and understand information from the wide world of sensors, from space to ground to maritime to air, to be able to do that. How you do that, I think you well articulated in the question about all the moving parts. The way to not do it is to basically amalgamate everything you just said and turn it into one monolithic solution that solves every part of the equation. That's generally doomed to failure. We see that history repeat itself time and time again. So you're stuck with Lego blocks, which means it's harder to explain, but actually is the acquisition or development approach that will succeed because it succeeds, commercially. So to follow through with your example, we want to get the information that's available inside of an intelligence operations center, inside of any ground station, inside of the DGS and the Air Force, and enable the operator inside, the pilot inside there, to be able to take advantage of that, both as an individual as well as the algorithms on board that are making different choices real for the particular pilot there. So to do that, you've got to connect it. So one of the programs that we have going on inside of ABMS is to be able to serve as a connective tissue, both in terms of language that's spoken as well as sort of the pitch or the frequency, if you will. And so this coming fiscal year, you'll get to see round 2 of that, which is our ability to have a translation capability via a platform that has to be in place for a primary mission, but give it a secondary mission to be able to connect this internet of into the things, in this case, the F-35. So inside in the inside force, as we sometimes call it, the principal capability and platform that we're working with now is going to be the low-cost attritable aircraft platform, or the Valkyrie, where this year we're going to do the first airborne version, or airborne test of being able to have a box, if you will, that then translates between an F-22 and an F-35, and then stretch goal, even a KC-46 tanker, and then assets on the ground. Similarly, later in the year, then we're going to take a KC-46 tanker, an outside force, but something that has to be there to deliver gas, put the same communications capability based off the Open Communication System standard, and then now have the ability to move data in a much wider bandwidth to many more forces, 5th to 5th, 5th to 4th, back to continental United States and other sort of central locations that we want to process and move information to. That's the pathway piece that's going to get solved via this. And then the programs themselves are going to take that forward as they upgrade and modernize their radios and apertures, as they handle DMS issues and have to upgrade due to maintenance over time. We're going to continue to add platforms into that Internet of Things network. And then the data, as all that happens, then more data moves and more data is translated via publish and subscribe network. And so now you've got not only the F-35 being able to pull in F-22 data, but also then any data from all other US Air Force or Space Force systems, as well as other services. And then likewise, it goes in the reverse direction too.
From connecting the domains to building the base of the future, our smart software solutions empower the operator's decision-making. Regardless of the mission, Parsons is there. Learn how Parsons is enabling the JADC2 mission and delivering a better world at parsons.com/JADC2.
So that really brings us to 2 things: cloud and standards. Now, from what I hear over the past few months, it seems that people are coming to the conclusion that building standards to reach back to older stovepipe systems, except in a few cases where they're crucial, may be just too hard and too expensive to do. Is that right? Or, so you're sort of generically looking more towards newer systems as you build this out? Or is that unfair?
Colin, nothing you ask is ever unfair. So there's a variety of intended users. So when you're talking about a operational, strategic, or tactical command and control platform or place, what we're driving towards is the ability to, instead of having bespoke single solutions for that platform, and in the Air Force case, you could think a CRC reporting center, or you could think an airborne platform like an AWACS or a JSTARS. You can think of an ops center or a DGS. Right now, there's specific weapon systems or IT systems that for each of those. What ABMS provides then is the warfighter only having to have a device that can connect to the network, and then the data moves naturally, just like you going to a website.
So you're looking at sort of magic boxes that will take the data from the two sides and allow them to communicate. Yes?
Nothing magic about these boxes. So this is commercially available computers with the security layer on top of them to be able to reach out to each of the classification layers network. We do this all the time, but we don't typically then run our applications and software that people interact with it over that. When you have access to that commercially available transport capabilities or government transport, it's great. But we can't presume that in warfare. And I think far too often we presume the perfect communications environment when we build systems. And so instead, ABMS is taking the approach that's much more commercially, the much more commercial approach, which is assume degradation, and then it's a great day when you have access to it. What that means is that in each of the edge, whether that's on a tanker, whether that's in the ops center, you have to have a local compute capability, which is why this all domain common environment, which is probably still military speak, I'm sorry, but what it does is it basically makes all the infrastructure bits and bytes transparent to the end user. And all you have to do is have a computer that can access the all domain environment on the network. And that's relatively straightforward when you have access to that transport options. Otherwise, you go with the local edge system. So that's kind of the secret sauce there. The difficult piece is where you have a tactical edge node that doesn't speak the frequency or the language from one system to another, like the F-22 and F-35 example. And to the extent we're able to pull those into the network, that's being smart about translation. And one of the ways to do that is take a platform that's side by side there for a primary purpose and give them a secondary function, which again is the right approach, but it's one that's not always done, where it's too easy to go towards a special purpose translator in the sky or on the ground to go do that. And with software-defined radios and networking, there's no reason for us to do that. And in fact, if we did it, the bad way, we would find ourselves stuck, say 2, 3, 4 years down in the future, where something that works today on November 3rd doesn't work in the future because software or because a standard has upgraded. And so that's back to that requirement from General Hyten that agility is the most important thing in the face of uncertainty, either from a tech development or from a war or threat type of perspective.
Now, one of the things all of this raises is security. You know, not just the jamming side, not just the hacking side, but cybersecurity, electronic warfare security, resilience. It sounds like by taking the commercial approach that you're almost by default building some of that in, but that doesn't include, NSA grade encryption and all that. How are you ensuring standards wise that that's central to the effort as well?
Yeah, great. So unfortunately, cybersecurity isn't only something that we have to worry about in the future with ABMS. It's really something writ large that's an important issue right now. So I wish it weren't, but it is. And so there's kind of the traditional way to approach cybersecurity, which is that perimeter defense. I got a castle, I build the moat around it, make it big, wide, patrol it, nobody can get in. That is a little bit of it's a nice idea, but unfortunately, whether actors or intentional
always work.
Yeah, that's right. Actors are trying to get in, or just unintentional accidents from users that are on the network, The reality is that we must presume and wisely presume that stuff is inside too. So the moat defense is insufficient. The nice thing is that there's a variety of recently evolved sets of capabilities to be able to address that. Notably, the importance of things like software-defined networking, where we can reconfigure the network via software very rapidly. If something were to happen, that's number one. Number two, especially on the device and the network side, looking at zero trust and individual personalities on there and their users and their functions and what they typically do. It's also in terms of the application, the software side, by us requiring the software to be done in accordance with our Agile DevOps reference design. What we get is a bunch of microservices. Think each application that you're using having hundreds or thousands of small services inside of there, and subdividing not only the success of the software into small pieces, but also the cybersecurity into small pieces. What we can do in that is that we can actually watch each element of the software package, and if it behaves out of accordance with what we expect, we can quickly shut down and restart up with confidence that nothing was inside of that particular system. So all the way from the way we run code and operate it, develop it, and then deploy it, to the way we look at the network, or better said, really network of networks. We're talking about sort of a bunch of subnets, if you will, out there. That's how, in zero trust in terms of an approach, and commercial grade encryption with NSA has overseas for us, and then there's some special sauce capabilities. Those are the right mix, and anything that we do, maybe there's an exception or two for an experiment or a test purpose, but I'm really driving us towards ensuring that the first time out of the gate, you've got that interim authority that leads to a permanent authority to operate or a permanent authority to connect, which means it's a little harder for us to get out and it's a little more complex. But out of a particular on-ramp event or an exam, if you will, of this Internet of Things system of systems, we've got greater confidence both that it'll actually integrate with the platform, because we're literally putting it on the platforms we intend to use it on. But also from a cybersecurity perspective, we're not going for waivers or special exceptions. We want to really drive the system as it needs to be, because cyber is going to be a critical component and enabler in the future.
So that sort of brings us back to the joint side of this to some degree. I know that you and the Air Force and the Army have an MOU so that everybody talks and people can't go, well, I don't want to play with this. We haven't seen a lot of talk from the Navy or from the Air Force and the Army about the Navy. Are you meeting with senior naval people on a regular basis? Are you looking at ways to tie into NIFCA, that sort of thing?
Yeah, great. So I've actually seen a lot of forward progress across the services. Of course, the Joint Staff and OSD are leading the charge to bring everybody together in that united front, both for standards as well as some of the experimentation events and of course the concepts, which we talked about earlier. So they're leading the charge there, but also, and in addition to that, each of the services are already working together. So for example, at the 3 on-ramps that we did as an Air Force and Space Force this past fiscal year, each of the services had some role in, some larger than others and some smaller, mostly due to just conflicting events and where assets needed to be or the maturity of tech systems over time. Likewise, we're working to do the same with the Navy, which we started to do here with the partnership and Valiant Shield for the 3rd on-ramp in September, and then going forward with their overmatch and of course Project Convergence with the Army. And so there are a lot of opportunities to be able to work together, and we're very aligned in terms of the vision. I think the memo that was signed between the Army and the Air Force was a great step. It basically codified what the technical folks have been working on, to date, and with the real, drive from the top, which is very helpful to make sure that any red tape gets cleared away to make sure that we can keep moving forward, and that's helpful. And I'm seeing good partnership as well from the Navy and their work. As we go forward. You asked specifically about some of the fire control systems from the other services as well.
Because the Navy argues, that essentially that's sort of their version of ABMS, if you will, for their surface fleet.
Yeah. So what we don't want to do is create sort of the one C2 system to kind of rule them all. What we're really talking about, the power is freeing up that data and allowing each of the services access to the information, and then sharing of that information. And each service has its own need, and in the context of an operation has its own operational imperative. So we've got to be, from a technology perspective, flexible enough to enable the operators to make those decisions, and then support their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and at the operational level, their operational concept, without being sort of encumbered by technology, not limiting to them. So what
you're confident that you're talking enough with the Navy that that won't be an issue?
Yeah, so here's where I think from a technical perspective, when you get to the brass tacks, you not only provide that end state, but you also provide the best technical approach to that. And when you get away from one system, quote unquote, doing everything, first of all, you're moving in a good direction. But what that does mean is that now your discussions with the services from a technical level are really about, what data do you have? We've got cloud, we've got data, you've got some data, maybe you don't have the cloud. And so then it's, how do I connect the networks there? So for the Navy Integrated Fire Control network, that is great. It has a function, and an important function to go do. It may or may not be the case that all the data from that particular kill chain, whatever, is relevant to all other players. And so what we really care about is, if you're the Integrated Battle Command, IBCS system, or the Integrated Tactical Network in the Army, or the Titan intelligence work, or your variety of Air Force networks, and the same thing for the Navy, we don't want to overwrite those systems, but instead we want to connect to and move data into and out of those systems. Best thought of like a bunch of subnets on the internet. We're talking to each other over a big internet, but my home network is different than your home network, different than office network. And that'd be the equivalent of IBCS and NIFCA. Those are all relevant for their purposes. The power then comes by enabling both those digital systems, but also the platforms they operate on, with the benefit of all of the information that's available outside of that organic system, which may help, for example, the Navy queue systems more effectively, or better manage their radar resources, because they had the ability to get information elsewhere that was beyond their sort of local tactical network and availability. So working through data sharing and then network connectivity, both tactically as well as through transport, is part of where the money is going to be made, if you will, from an operational impact perspective.
There's been some, I think it's probably best described as unease up on the Hill about whether the Air Force is really sort of ready to absorb as much money as you want to absorb to build ABMS. And there was a GAO report that questioned some elements. I know it's an old report. You've come a long way since then. But pretend you're sitting down with the staffers and key members from the Hill and explaining why the Air Force will be able to effectively spend that money, and to what end.
Yeah, so there is literally 100% agreement from the operational side that we can no longer fight the way that we're set up to fight today, which is stovepipe capabilities. And if we agree, which everyone does, that the lines in the sand are fake, and instead we have to be able to integrate our capabilities into an ecosystem, we have to get after that. Then it's the how do we get after that? So the normal way we get after that is to spend a lot of time, and then at some point in the future, 5-10 years down the road, we get to see whether our ideas had any merit or not. And as we started, at least from an Air and Space Force perspective, from an ABMS perspective, we surveyed past experiences and recognized that approach was not one that was likely to succeed. We met with commercial innovation pioneers that have basically done Internet of Things and become very wealthy because of it out on the outside world, so that we had true experts that knew what they were doing. Then we looked at innovative, fast-moving organizations like Special Operations Command, and took the acquisition approach really from both parties, both the outside world and Special Operations Command. And we said, well,
open standards.
open standards and actually trying and building out that ecosystem in a continuous integration and continuous delivery approach, which basically means hand in hand with the operators. You don't write a lengthy requirements Bible and then throw it over a transom. Instead, you work together, and as the tech improves, you get capability. And as the operators try it out, they then sort of decide what features are important or not. And that's from an application perspective, but also hardware. So if we agree that we've got to go do it, and we agree that it's not a good idea to build some kind of monolithic type system, and instead we ought to look to the successful approaches that have done this already, then we're into building the Lego blocks or the modular capabilities that compose themselves to be able to do that Internet of Things. And that's where we sort of landed on the approach. And to be able to see that from an architecture level and ecosystem to come together, we recognized there was no good event to both drive that forward or to evaluate whether the architecture is in the right direction or not. And so we created what we call on-ramps to be able to look at an architecture level. And we have nothing. We have exercises, we have rehearsals, we have experiments and developmental testing, but we have nothing that actually brings an ecosystem together to see if we can work as one team. And so that's why partnering with the combatant commanders is important, and driving the individual product lines inside of ABMS through that on-ramp engine to see what's working and what's not and how they're working together, more importantly, at these events. And so what the end state is, instead of sort of me giving you a big list of requirements from the operational community and sort of trusting that 7 to 10 years something will happen, faith becomes sight every 4 months. And so from an oversight perspective, they're actually going to get to be able to see the ecosystem develop as it develops, and then see what's working, what's not. And from a taxpayer perspective, the opportunity to actually stop activities that are not producing in a positive direction and then start others. We don't really, aside from this, we don't have a great venue to be able to do that. And so I think that's both the value proposition, and then why we think this acquisition approach in particular is successful. It's not a new idea. It's tried and true outside DoD. It's even tried and true in software and in the special operations community here inside of DoD. And it's got the most chance of being successful. And so, keep supporting it, keep working through it. We know we've got to get it, but if you don't, come to the next on-ramp and see what happens and see where the data moves and hear from the operators. And then you get to actually see, what's successful and what's not. I will say too, we've got to help work with the oversight organizations for all the development ops or DevOps type approaches, so that they've got the appropriate oversight levers that they're comfortable with. In light of the fact that though this isn't new, we've been doing it for several years. It's clearly something that is new for some, and so we've got to work through that to be able to ensure that they provide the oversight roles that are so helpful, both for us as well as the broader U.S. community.
It sounds, if you take all of that together, that you're almost arguing that the ABMS approach can provide Congress with better oversight at an earlier stage than certainly the JSIDS process would.
Yeah, but that's both for them, but also really for us. I love the way you summarize that, right? We want to see, we want to learn, and we want to get data. We don't want to trust in glossy brochures and future projections that history tells us will most definitely be wrong. And so that's why we've got to keep on this path and continue to enable the great technologists and operators that are already seeing benefit, whether they're in the front lines of COVID, taking ABMS technology in the hands of the deployed medical corps that are using the devices and cloud and AI predictions and hospital utilization, all the way out to operators in European Command and Pacific Command and Space Command that are using it even now from a technical perspective for ConOps development, as well as needed actual operations. So we've got the full gamut there, and I think that's the path to succeed.
I think that's a really good point to wrap this up on. I do have one question I'd like to throw out just to see where we go with it. Is there, your boss, Will Roper's really good at coming up with cool examples of stuff. Is there a new cool example in the ABMS world that we haven't heard about yet, that you know about, that isn't classified, that you can share with our viewers?
Oh, it's I assume it's overused now that that ABMS enabled capabilities allowed that artillery piece to shoot down the cruise missiles. That
Yeah.
was
that one's long gone.
oh man, that's a
Still very cool, but
that's right. Yeah. So the bad side about that one is that people get real fascinated with the actual bang and the flash to bang components of it, and lose the 30 other ABMS components that actually made that rapid kill chain actually be successful. Perhaps I would use the example that I really started with, which is from starting in September. We put for the first time the power of an operations center into a handheld, commercially available tablet over a 5G tactical network for the first time. And that means literally the same software, the same data, the same decision aids that were used by all the 4-stars back in the brick and mortar facility with the nice screens were in the palm of their hands, and they could see each domain of the fight at the secret level of classification over a tactical high-speed network with commercial security, guards on top of it. And that's a great example of the future, and the future is actually here. And what you're gonna be seeing is not only will those 1,000 songs or the 1,000 kilobytes be in your pocket, but then you're gonna move that not just to be on the tablet, but then move it into the weapon systems and the platforms themselves, as we put commercially available compute and store on board our assets and ground stations into the future. So maybe there's no big bang there, but from a warfighting perspective, where data is the currency that's going to win or lose, and platforms are only going to be as good as the data that they have access to, having all that data from an ops center in your pocket, that's where the money is made from an operational perspective.
I just have to say, I've been doing this for a long time, since the late 90s. And I remember when the Army was talking about the strategic sergeant back in the late 90s and how data was going to be available to him, and he was going to be able to shoot around corners and lead his platoon in ways no one had ever imagined. And it sounds like we're just about there now. Is that fair to say, do you think?
That would be I would love to announce that we didn't just shoot down the cruise missile, but the bullet took a turn around a corner. I like where your head's at. But what we're really saying is that if the objective is to be agile and to adopt broadly available and upgradable commercial technology, but then put the military secret sauce on it, because that's the only way to ride the wave of commercial innovation, and then be up to date as both the threat and technology maneuvers. That's going to keep us in check to make sure that we're doing this, and we're not doing something just for DoD or make it military that will make it not adaptable in the face of uncertainty in the future. So that discipline to continue to move fast, to iterate, to develop and demonstrate the architecture as it evolves, and to actually grab it and then use it by the operators outside of those sort of exams every 4 months, if you will. It's not about the exam, it's about the ecosystem that's being built through them. Then we can have confidence that it's not a talking point, it's not a story, it's not a narrative, like your example, but it's actually happening. And if it's not happening, you stop and change. That's the way every successful commercial company operates. That's the way your Air Force and Space Force are operating.
Preston Dunlap, thank you very much for your time.
All right, Colin, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.